Imagine voting for a man who promised to protect your community, and then watching his agents come for you. ICE raids are back in Chicago, and the same Latino voters who once cheered for Trump are now living in fear. This isn't just politics. It's a harsh lesson in what happens when loyalty meets reality. Recently, reports have surfaced that ICE agents have returned to Chicago, carrying out widespread operations in search of undocumented immigrants. The city, known for its large immigrant population, has become a focal point of these enforcement actions. Many observers link this resurgence of ICE activity to the political climate shaped by Donald Trump's presidency. While it's often said that white voters and some black voters helped bring Trump to power, a significant number of Latino voters also supported him. This reality underscores a complex truth. The Latino community is far from monolithic. Many immigrants who came to the United States legally working tirelessly to obtain citizenship feel frustration toward those who cross the border without documentation. In their view, the influx of undocumented immigrants brings challenges to neighborhoods, especially in Hispanic areas of cities like Chicago and Los Angeles. These sentiments stem from a sense of fairness and identity. Some see themselves as having done things the right way, while feeling that others are undermining that effort. This tension reveals deeper divisions within immigrant communities about belonging, legality, and what it means to be American. Comedian Corey Holcomb, a Chicago native, recently brought attention to this issue by asking a question that struck a nerve within the city's Latino population, one that many may have found uncomfortable, yet impossible to ignore.
But now Corey Holcomb, who is from Chicago, obviously Chicago has a lot of Hispanics, he asked a question that was probably hard for them to answer.
To my Mexican brothers and sisters, when I used to see you guys so proud to vote for your Republican Party, because there was a lot of my Mexican brothers and sisters. I remember the first time Trump got in, there was a lot of my Mexican brothers and sisters who were like, I vote for Trump.
Yeah.
And I used to be like, okay, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think now a lot of my Mexican brothers and sisters who wanted to do that, for whatever reason they wanted to do it, got to be feeling the heat now when you can't walk to the store safely anymore. You can get snatched up, black bagged, and never be seen again. Have you ever thought about that? Somebody who's been in this country their whole life, and they can justify grabbing you, taking you out of this country, and they're not taking them back to Mexico. Like they would have trucks for that.
Right.
That's where they sending them to Africa. That would be.
They
funny.
sending them somewhere where they're disestablished. Like, do you understand how karma slapped you in the face for boasting on that? Because there's a lot of black people who want to be part of political parties that don't serve their best interests as well. But what I'm saying is, I never forgot when my Mexican brothers and sisters were saying that. I used to be like,
It's not just about Mexico, there's a much deeper conversation happening here. One that stretches beyond borders, beyond party lines, and even beyond race. When people talk about immigration or Latino politics in America, they often flatten the story into something simple: Mexicans versus ICE, conservatives versus liberals, citizens versus illegals. But that misses the real complexity. Let's slow down and unpack what's really being said. At the heart of this issue lies a complicated mix of pride, identity, and survival. A lot of Hispanic voters were genuinely enthusiastic about supporting Donald Trump. That surprises some people. But for those of us who understand the internal diversity of Latino communities, it makes a certain kind of sense. Now, I'll be upfront, I voted for Trump myself. But that decision, for me and many others, didn't come from a place of blind loyalty or political ignorance. It came from a particular worldview shaped by generations of history in this country. The Hispanic experience in the United States isn't one story, it's hundreds of stories braided together, each with its own struggles and values. For some of us, our families have been in this country not for decades but for centuries. My ancestors were here long before many of today's politicians' families ever set foot on American soil for 100 years of living, working, and contributing to this land. So when immigration crackdowns happen, we often view them differently. They don't always touch our immediate families, and that can create a certain emotional distance. If someone gets deported, chances are, it's not one of us. It's someone else, someone newer, someone whose roots haven't had time to dig as deep. That's where the experience of long-established Hispanic Americans begins to diverge from that of recent immigrants. To us, this country isn't just a place we came to, it's home, and has been for generations. We've fought in its wars, built its infrastructure, and raised its children. We're as much a part of the American fabric as anyone else. But that pride sometimes turns into a kind of defensiveness. You hear people say, "We did things the right way. We followed the law. We earned our citizenship." It's not an uncommon sentiment among older or more established Latinos, and on some level, it's understandable. After all, the process of becoming a citizen isn't easy. It takes patience, sacrifice, and a willingness to navigate systems that often seem designed to keep you out. So when someone else crosses the border illegally or overstays a visa, it can feel unfair. But here's where the story gets complicated. Over time, that sense of pride can morph into division. You start to see us and them, citizens versus undocumented, legal versus illegal, deserving versus undeserving. And that's exactly the kind of division that keeps communities from standing together. Because the truth is, the line separating legal from illegal isn't always as clean as it seems. Many of us have cousins, in-laws, or neighbors who fall on the other side of that line. They work the same jobs, attend the same churches, raise their kids in the same schools, yet the law sees them differently. And that difference can mean everything: freedom or deportation, belonging or exile. When Trump promised stricter immigration enforcement, some Latinos saw that as a sign of strength. They thought it meant protecting the country's borders and rewarding those who followed the rules. But as time went on, the impact of those policies became personal. Suddenly, the raids weren't just happening in other neighborhoods, they were happening next door. Friends were being questioned. Workers were disappearing from job sites. Families were being torn apart in silence. It was in those moments that many began to realize something deeper: that power in America doesn't always distinguish between accents or ancestry. To many of the people enforcing those policies, brown is brown, Spanish is Spanish, and suspicion is universal. It didn't matter that some of us could trace our lineage to the early 1600s. If you looked the part or spoke the language, you were fair game, and that realization hit hard. It forced a lot of Hispanic Americans to confront an uncomfortable truth: that proximity to whiteness or wealth doesn't guarantee protection. That citizenship papers don't always translate to equality. That even when you do everything right, you can still be treated like an outsider. That's when the conversation began to shift. People started asking harder questions about identity, about loyalty, about who really benefits when we turn on each other. Because while we were busy arguing over who belonged here legally, the system kept operating exactly as it was designed: dividing and conquering, keeping us distracted while real power stayed concentrated elsewhere. In every generation, immigrant groups have faced this cycle: Irish, Italians, Jews, Asians. Each has gone through its own baptism by exclusion before being slowly folded into the American mainstream. But the Latino story, especially in the modern era, is different. Our communities are too large, too diverse, and too connected to be easily absorbed or erased. We're not a small minority that can disappear into whiteness. We're a fundamental part of the country's present and future. Yet despite that, many of us still struggle with acceptance, not just from the broader society, but from each other. Some Latinos believe assimilation is the path forward: speak English, work hard, keep your head down. Others believe resistance is the answer: protect our culture, defend our people, demand equality. Somewhere between those two lies the messy, complicated truth of what it means to be Latino in America today. As time went on, I started to see that the real issue wasn't about being for or against Trump. It was about how we define ourselves in relation to power. Some of us thought we could align ourselves with those in control and be accepted, but history shows that acceptance, when it comes, is often conditional. That's the important thing we began to uncover beneath the surface: the illusion of belonging. It's easy to believe that success or citizenship grants you safety, that doing things the right way shields you from discrimination. But identity in America has never been purely about legality or achievement. It's about perception. And perception is something you can't legislate. So yes, this conversation started with Mexico, but it's not just about Mexico anymore. It's about what happens when communities forget that their struggles are connected. It's about the danger of thinking that someone else's oppression isn't your problem. Because, as history has shown again and again, the moment you believe that injustice won't reach your doorstep, it's already on its way. And maybe that's the real lesson hidden in all this: that solidarity isn't just moral, it's practical, that empathy isn't weakness, it's survival, and that until we all recognize how deeply intertwined our stories really are, the cycle will keep repeating itself generation after generation, border after border, policy after policy.
All these Latinos voted for Trump, and they stated that they regret their votes for Trump because of the economy and mass deportations, which was Trump. Trump was really transparent on these particular issues. He'd been running on border security for over half a decade. He'd been running on tariffs and who could use which bathroom and who could play in whose sports. So there's no possible way you could really have voters remorse when Trump was.
Lately, many Hispanic voters have begun rethinking their past political choices. According to my brother Daniel, there's a growing sense of regret among some Latinos who once supported Donald Trump. They're realizing that their vote may have helped empower policies that now harm their own communities. What once felt like a promise of prosperity has instead brought fear and uncertainty. Initially, Trump's campaign appealed to many Latinos who believed in his message of hard work, entrepreneurship, and national pride. But when immigration crackdowns began, reality hit home. Families saw neighbors, co-workers, and even friends deported. Many didn't expect that the same system they supported would turn its gaze toward people who looked and sounded like them. Some thought, "I'm not black, so this isn't my problem." But that illusion faded quickly. In America, racial and cultural hierarchies still run deep. When white immigrants from South Africa or Europe arrive, they're often welcomed with open arms. Rarely are they questioned about their papers or told to go back. Yet many Latinos, even U.S. citizens, face suspicion and harassment simply because they speak Spanish fluently or look a certain way. This dynamic exposes a harsh truth. The idea of America as a place for everyone often bends toward preserving whiteness at the center. Some Latino immigrants believed that success owning a business, building wealth, or contributing to the economy would earn them acceptance. But as ICE raids continue and prejudice persists, it's become clear that financial stability doesn't guarantee equality. Respect in America, for many, is conditional. As comedian Corey Holcomb bluntly put it, "What did you think was going to happen?" Still, Latino communities have shown remarkable resilience. They've built strong local economies and networks that allow them to rely on one another, minimizing the shocks of discrimination and economic pressure. Other minority groups, such as Arab Americans, have followed similar paths, recognizing that self-investment is key to independence and empowerment. Take Dubai, for example, a once barren desert transformed into a global powerhouse by a people determined to define their own destiny. This lesson applies to everyone, including Black Americans. The moment any group starts believing they've arrived, society has a way of reminding them who still holds the power. Even successful figures like Brandon Tatum, who has profited from conservative politics and media, find that influence doesn't necessarily mean acceptance. In the United States, political and social power continues to revolve around one dominant group, the white majority, especially those living in the vast stretch of Middle America. These regions, Nebraska, Ohio, the Dakotas, Iowa, Kansas, and other heartland states, represent more than just geography. They symbolize the cultural center of gravity around which much of the nation still orbits. It's in these places, with their small towns and suburban networks, that America's identity has long been defined and guarded. Politicians, no matter how progressive their slogans sound, still shape their policies with these voters in mind. Every campaign, whether local or national, eventually circles back to protecting their comfort, their sense of belonging, and their way of life. From the outside, it might seem as if America celebrates diversity. Look at the commercials, the classrooms, the music charts. But beneath that glossy layer of inclusion lies an unspoken truth. Whiteness remains the default setting. It's the benchmark by which everything else is measured. Every community of color, Black, Latino, Asian, Indigenous, has to navigate its relationship to that standard. Money, fame, or political loyalty might earn you temporary acceptance, a seat at the table, perhaps, but that doesn't mean you're truly part of the room. Because belonging in America isn't just about what you have, it's about who feels comfortable standing next to you. We see this dynamic everywhere, often in quiet, subtle ways. The successful Black or Latino entrepreneur may be celebrated in magazines and on panels, yet still watched closely in certain neighborhoods. The immigrant doctor or engineer might achieve the American dream, on paper, yet still face suspicion when speaking their native language in public. And while celebrities of color can fill arenas and sell millions, they still face backlash the moment They step beyond entertainment into politics or protest. It's a hierarchy built not on law but on perception. Power in America isn't just held through votes or wealth, it's maintained through the collective imagination of who belongs and who doesn't. The tragedy is that this imagination is still deeply racialized. When you look at the machinery of government, it becomes even clearer. The Electoral College, the Senate's disproportionate representation, and the sway of rural, predominantly white states ensure that Middle America holds immense influence over national decisions. Policies around healthcare, immigration, education, and policing are often crafted to preserve the comfort of those areas, even when urban or diverse regions bear the consequences. And so, the cycle continues. The same demographic remains the political center, while everyone else is positioned around it, sometimes welcomed, sometimes tolerated, but rarely considered equal stakeholders. For minorities, this creates a strange duality. On one hand, they're encouraged to participate, to vote, to contribute, to assimilate. On the other, they're constantly reminded of invisible boundaries. The message is subtle but persistent. You're valuable, but only to a point. You're American, but not quite like us. This illusion of inclusion can be seductive. You get promoted, you buy the house, your kids go to good schools, and you start to think you've crossed the threshold. But belonging in America is a moving target. The rules change depending on the news cycle, the neighborhood, or the next election. You might be praised for your hard work and discipline, yet the same traits are interpreted differently when seen through the lens of whiteness. Ambition becomes arrogance. Outspokenness becomes aggression. Cultural pride becomes defiance. It's an unspoken system of checks that keeps people in their place without needing to say it outright. Even the economy reflects this dynamic. The labor of people of color powers much of the country, from farm workers and factory employees to nurses, delivery drivers, and tech innovators. Their tax dollars sustain schools and infrastructure. Their creativity shapes global culture. Yet when discussions about who built America arise, the image that persists is still overwhelmingly white. This isn't to say progress hasn't been made, because it has. Civil rights legislation, cultural representation, and generational change have opened doors that were once locked tight. But true equality is not the same as representation. It's one thing to be seen, it's another to be safe, respected, and free from suspicion. The United States has mastered the art of symbolic inclusion: diverse ads, multicultural holidays, corporate statements of solidarity, while maintaining systems that quietly preserve inequality. The hierarchy of comfort and color ensures that everyone knows their place, even if it's never spoken aloud. Consider how neighborhoods are structured. Even when people of color achieve financial success, many still find barriers in housing and lending. Good schools and safe communities often become coded language for white neighborhoods. When new families move in, the subtle shifts begin. Home values fluctuate, neighbors whisper, and before long, the cycle of quiet segregation starts all over again. In workplaces, the pattern repeats. Diversity is celebrated in mission statements but undermined in boardrooms. People of color are hired for visibility but rarely promoted to positions with real authority. And when they do reach those positions, they often face pressures to assimilate, to soften their tone, adjust their speech, or avoid topics that make others uncomfortable. The same is true in politics. Candidates of color can win elections, but they often do so by downplaying their identity or reassuring white voters that they won't disrupt the status quo. They have to prove they can represent everyone, a standard rarely applied to white politicians. At the end of the day, America still operates on an unspoken social contract, one that privileges comfort for some and endurance for others. You might be appreciated for your labor, your tax dollars, or your innovation, but that appreciation doesn't translate to full membership in the inner circle. It's conditional, revocable, and often dependent on silence. Until true equality replaces this illusion of inclusion, every community outside that circle remains, in some way, a guest. The word guest sounds polite, even welcoming, but it carries a quiet threat. A guest can always be asked to leave. That's why conversations about race and power in America can't just be about diversity, they must be about redistribution. Who makes the rules? Who enforces them? Who feels safe enough to question them without fear? Until those questions are answered honestly, the hierarchy will remain intact. Equality isn't a photo op. It's a restructuring of who gets to define what normal looks like. And that means reimagining an America where belonging isn't something granted by the majority but something that exists by right for everyone. Because if the foundation of a nation is built on exclusion, no amount of inclusion can make it stable. The illusion may hold for a while, but cracks always show. And sooner or later, those on the margins, the guests, will demand not just a seat at the table, but ownership of the house.